father's funeral was too much for her to bear. He's one of dozens of people killed when Guatemala's Fuego volcano erupted. Homes have been destroyed or buried in ash, and animals in the path of fast-moving lava killed.
When it came, it was like a sea, destroying people in its path, tearing apart homes and pets. I can't believe how many people died.
Days after the eruption, and hundreds of people are still missing. Rescue teams say torrential rains are making it hard to continue searching. The downpours turn the ash into mudslides.
The soil's unstable. Some rocks fell behind this curve, and there are parts of tree trunks that don't let vehicles pass.
But this hasn't stopped some villagers intent on finding their family and friends.
Please find them.
Authorities have paused the search, so we decided to come and search ourselves. But it's tiring. I don't have any strength left. The sun burns. The sand burns. It's so hard.
It's been more than 4 decades since Fuego shot lava and ash from its vent, and researchers say it's been erupting regularly ever since. There are fears a massive eruption like Sunday's could happen again.
The campaign against global warming seems to have gone bust. It started as an effort to protect the environment. It is not that anymore. UC Berkeley visiting scholar Stephen Hayward just wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal detailing how the movement has been hijacked by obsessions with race and gender. Worries about carbon and rising sea levels have turned into speeches about fighting misogyny and so-called climate justice, whatever that is. Stephen Hayward joins us tonight to explain. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you, Tucker. Isn't it amazing how everything seems to get reduced to race and justice these days?
Well, yeah, but it's especially amazing when topics that have no conceivable connection to race and gender get pulled in. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, the whole point of the article was fairly simple. Most issues go through these long wave cycles. There's lots of early interest. The press gets onto it. Flurry of political activity. Some policies are made. Then we start having consideration of trade-offs, and that's been going on with global warming for several years now. It's really expensive to do what a lot of the climatistas, as I call them, want us to do. And so now you're seeing more and more expressions, including in the Paris Climate Accord, that we need to consider gender equality and climate justice. That's a sign that the issue has, as the cliche goes, jumped the shark. And no, it's kind of at the end of its string. And public opinion surveys here and in Europe show declining public interest in the whole darn thing.
Well, it's a boutique issue for rich people, obviously, but it's also a little confusing. I mean, even if you think that climate justice is real, or even if you can explain what it is, I've never met anyone who can, or if you think that gender equality is an important part of this, what does that have to do with science? That's not science, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, and that was one of the things I said in the article is look, I'm not questioning any of what is called the consensus about climate science.
Right.
I'm just saying as a political and policy matter, this has run its course. And my goodness, you ought to see my Twitter feed blow up yesterday and today. Apparently, it's not enough to call someone a climate denier anymore when you dissent from climate orthodoxy. I'm getting called a white male supremacist, which is a really a good sign that you've run out of arguments about the issue itself.
Good evening. WA has been blasted by destructive winds and heavy rain as a massive cold front swept across the coast. Tens of thousands of homes have been blacked out and boats smashed by rough seas. Scott Cunningham is in Rockingham. And Scott, this system really packed a punch.
Michael, wind gusts of up to 109 kilometres an hour paired with record rainfall in some areas of the state caused widespread damage. 98 calls to the SES were made for help. Some crews still tending to those jobs as we go to air tonight. The latest update we have from Western Power is that they're still trying to reconnect 35,000 homes and businesses back on the grid. That's an area from Kalbarri down to Albany. Now, the Weather Bureau has said that this wasn't an uncommon cold front, but what was unusual about it was the size and the width and the fact that it impacted so much of our state.
Manpower no match for Mother Nature. Boaties at the mercy of a second powerful cold front in 1 week. Yachts snapping their moorings off Rockingham's foreshore.
I mean, I could get really, really upset, but there's absolutely no point of it. It is what it is, unfortunately.
Tides a metre higher than predicted claimed vessels from Dalkeith in the city.
This poor bugger has lost his boat. It's sunk sitting off the esplanade in Dalkeith.
Right through the southwest. Yachts also coming to grief at Bunbury's Coombana Bay Sailing Club, while in Dawesville 2 houseboats went under. The front of the storm rolled through at dawn, bringing damaging winds, heavy rain and flooding. Felt hard in Broadwater near Bustleton, where locals were left knee-deep.
It was nearly in the house. Well, it was coming in at one point, but not too bad, but we sandbagged in time.
Allen Street, one of almost 100 calls for help to the SES in a hectic 24 hours. Western Power says at its peak, 40,000 West Aussies were knocked off the grid, 6,000 in the metro area. In Fremantle, Ian Hutchinson spent a nervous night at his Coast Tavern on Port Beach, where the sand dunes were eroding.
I've never been in a position like this where we've really worried about it. We've never had, I've never seen the dunes disappear like this.
Holiday makers blown away at Rottnest. At dawn, the island recorded the strongest wind gusts in the state, up to 109 kilometres an hour. The same was felt along the Bustleton jetty. Gusts that strong also recorded at Cape Naturalist. The state was lashed by 2 systems. The first drenched the north, bringing record rain in Denham, where 98 millimetres fell in 24 hours, and Shark Bay, where 95.6 mils landed in the gauges. Before the second front moved across Perth and the southwest early this morning. By midday, winds still strong enough to crush Rebecca Hawkins' car in Falcon.
My car, my life, really. We're always in it, so yeah.
The residents there could be forgiven for thinking that Rockingham and Mandurah have been dealt a cruel blow by the weather gods, but it's just the way that the systems are set up at the moment. With the northerly winds, that curvature of the bay area through Geograph really means that the sea is pushed right up against that.
The showers handy for farmers in the wheat belt, who can expect more rain on Thursday.
civil defense message for Friday, June 8th at 6 in the morning. Hawaiian Volcano Observatory reports that vigorous lava eruptions continue in the lower East Rift Zone. Fissure 8 is producing a large channelized flow that is entering the ocean at Kapoho Bay and producing a large laze plume. Due to the lava entering the ocean, the following policies are in effect. Lazes form when hot lava hits the ocean, sending hydrochloric acid and steam with tiny glass particles into the air. Health hazards of laze include lung damage and eye and skin irritation. Be aware that the laze plume travels with the wind and can change direction without warning. Due to the current volcanic activity, the following policies are in effect. Leilani Estates, west of Moku Street, is open only to residents with official credentials. There is no curfew. Government Beach Road, between Kahakai Boulevard and Cinder Road, is open to Wawa and Papaya Farms Road, only to residents with official credentials. There is no curfew. Residents in these areas should heed warnings from civil defense officials and be prepared to evacuate with little notice. The shelter at Pahoa Community Center is open and pet-friendly. The Keau Armory Shelter has reached capacity. Hawaiian Volcano Observatory reports volcanic gas emissions remain very high from fissure eruptions.
French President Emmanuel Macron has come good on one of his campaign promises and banned the use of mobile phones in primary, junior and middle schools, both inside the classroom and even outside in the school playground. Children will be allowed to bring their phones to school, but are not allowed to get them out at any time until they leave, even during breaks. This school in Bourges has not allowed mobile phones since September, and teachers say it's made a difference. I had the impression they're more receptive now than when they had the use of all devices. I don't see much difference between this year and last. I don't think it changes much in the classroom. Phones were already forbidden during class time, but with the new law, primary and junior high students have to keep their phones in backpacks or otherwise out of sight. Figures in France show nearly 90% of children aged 12 to 17 own a smartphone.
After nearly 3 months of these weekly protests, the big question was, will this continue to escalate? A couple weeks ago, we saw violent clashes here along the border in which 60 Palestinians were killed. What we're seeing today is slightly less violent, slightly less large in terms of Palestinian protesters. There have been clashes that has been violent. According to Israeli officials, there have been several Molotov cocktails thrown at Israeli troops, and more than 380 Palestinians have been injured in these clashes. But we're seeing really much smaller groups of people along the border. There has not been the violence that we've seen recently, but the big change that we've seen today in the last couple days is the militants in Gaza are using these kites. They're lighting kites on fire, and then they're sending them across the border to burn Israeli fields, to start fires in these fields. It's done a lot of damage to Israeli fields, and the reason this is significant is because a couple weeks ago we saw rocket fire coming from Gaza, something that's very regular. These kites are much more difficult to control, where they land, where they take off. So this is the type of thing we're seeing here. It's a big change in terms of tactics by the militants in Gaza, but it does have the potential to be a very big problem, Sandra, for Israeli officials on this side.
We begin this morning with President Trump wrapping up the first of two high-profile summits on his schedule at the G7 summit in Quebec, Canada, where he has been meeting with leaders from 6 U.S. allies, including Canada, France, Britain, Germany, Italy, and Japan.
The already fragile relations became even more strained Friday after Mr. Trump suggested that the group should invite Russia back to the table, 4 years after it pushed out Vladimir Putin for violating international law. And that wasn't all that angered the allies. Weijia Jiang is in Quebec City with the latest. Weijia, good morning.
Oh, good morning. The road to the G7 summit was paved with angry remarks between President Trump and other leaders, clashing over those new U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. And even though there were several displays of unity here, the president has not indicated he's willing to reverse them. In Quebec, Canada, President Trump put on a big smile next to allies who he has publicly sparred with in recent days, trying to ease the tension with a joke.
Justin has agreed to cut all tariffs and all trade barriers between Canada and the United States, so I'm very happy
So I'd
about
say
that.
NAFTA's in good shape.
And a compliment.
We've had really a very good relationship, very special.
French President Emmanuel Macron echoed the shift in tone.
On trade, there is a critical path. I saw the willingness on all the sides to find agreements and have a win-win approach.
But just hours before the summit started, the leaders were engaged in a war of words amid fears of a trade war.
We are not going to live with the deals the way they are. European Union treats us very unfairly. Canada, very unfairly.
Addressing volatile disagreements with the U.S., President Macron tweeted earlier this week, "The American president may not mind being isolated, but neither do we mind signing a 6-country agreement if need be," and posted this sharp rebuke seemingly directed at Mr. Trump. No leader is eternal. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently expressed dismay after President Trump imposed new tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and the EU, citing national security concerns.
The idea that we are somehow a national security threat to the United States is quite frankly insulting and unacceptable.
President Trump provoking U.S. allies further by calling for Russia's reinstatement to the group after it pushed out President Vladimir Putin for illegally annexing Crimea in 2014.
They should let Russia come back in because we should have Russia at the negotiating table.
The crater and surrounding devastation shows how powerful the explosion was in the heart of Sadr city in northeastern Baghdad. Homes and businesses destroyed. The area is the stronghold of the influential Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr.
There were missiles, grenades and other munitions stashed and they exploded on civilians. My son's house was hit with 3 missiles. My son's family was hit. His house and his car were destroyed and some of our neighbours were killed and injured. We appealed to our leaders to help us, and the peace brigades, they need to hold the ones behind this accountable.
Iraq's Ministry of Interior has launched an investigation into what it says was an explosion of a weapons cache hidden in a mosque.
I have no words left to express this calamity. If I start speaking, I will lose my temper. No cleric or religious man accepts such thing, not even an official or an MP. What did these innocent people do to deserve this? People remained scared the entire night. Other people overnighted in hospitals. Not to mention young children. Some were gravely injured. We don't know who to complain to. Is it rational to store weapons in such residential area? Look at the destruction and judge by yourself.
Witnesses say mourners were using a tent after a funeral next to the mosque before the blast. They say the heat or flames from cooking in the tent may have caused the weapons to explode. Muqtada al-Sadr released a statement Thursday morning calling for patience and calm. He said it was important for people not to take advantage of what he describes as the improved security and political situation in Iraq. He called for the setting up of a special investigative committee into the blast and for it to release its findings within 72 hours.
The State Department has evacuated several American staffers from a consulate in China after they came down with a mysterious illness. Officials say a number of workers and their families at its consulate in Guangzhou were sent back to the U.S. for further medical evaluation. Their symptoms include headaches, hearing loss, and cognitive issues. They are similar to those experienced by American diplomats in Cuba in 2016. We're joined by CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues to discuss these latest developments. So, Jeff, we've now seen this type of attack in 2 places, Cuba and now China. Do U.S. officials believe these are linked and being done with malicious intent?
Well, listen, you can't rule out that they are linked, given that you had the incidents in Cuba and now what's happening in China. Too much of a coincidence that this would just be something that was happening by accident. And so Investigators haven't told us much about what they found, but clearly there has to be some sort of connection there, and I think that's the way they're operating. In fact, they're treating some of the cases in China just as they did some of the cases in Cuba. Keep in mind, in Cuba, there were 24 people, 24 Americans or diplomatic workers treated. In this case, so far, U.S. officials say 1 U.S. personnel suffered a medical incident, but there are many more who are being looked at, who are being examined. So there are so many similarities here, Elaine, that it's hard to rule out that this is something that someone is doing with malicious intent.
Well, Jeff, is there any sense of who the main suspects are?
No, it's too early for that, too. However, there are some American officials who privately say that, listen, this has to be some sort of state actor. Maybe it's China. Maybe it's Russia. But it's too early to assign any sort of blame at this point. American officials seem to be taking a more cautious approach to this, especially compared to what they did in Cuba. And, you know, when it came to Cuba, they were much more aggressive in trying to assign blame. In fact, blaming the Cubans. The Cubans denied that they had any involvement. But in this case, with the Chinese, they seem to be taking a more cautious approach.
Yeah, I was going to ask, has this incident affected diplomacy between the U.S. and China?
Well, that's a concern right now, given everything else that is going on in terms of the diplomatic relations between the Chinese and U.S. officials. And so that may be something that is at play here, why U.S. officials are taking such a cautious approach with these mysterious sonic attacks. But obviously, this is something that is serious. It is affecting U.S. personnel overseas. Could it be some sort of malicious attack? Who's behind it? You know, this is serious, and especially as these cases continue to grow.
Well, the State Department sent a medical team to China to examine staffers. What are they finding?
Well, they haven't reported back in terms of what they found just yet, but clearly there is a consistent pattern here that they're concerned about within State Department circles. There is concern about this, and that's why you have U.S. officials. They're not wasting any time, especially with these types of sonic attacks. Again, they're mysterious, but what is not mysterious are the link between the symptoms that people are showing that you see on the screen here: cognitive issues, headaches, hearing loss, nausea. So these are serious symptoms that people are showing. So this is something that is not a joke, and that's why you have U.S. officials taking it very seriously, and they're looking into it.